This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Exciting show today. Coach John Moore, the basketball coach for the last 27 years, recently retired at Westmont College, is with us. John's just a wonderful man. Has lived a great life, has some great insights. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. John Moore on Good Life coming up next. Hi, this is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I have a special guest today. Coach John Moore is with me. Coach Moore has been at Westmont College for 27 years. Has just left the head coaching position, but he's staying on at the college as a professor and associate athletic director. He's been a friend of mine. In fact, we got to Westmont in a way in the same year, in 1993. That's when I arrived. Yeah. Little fanfare. When you came back to be the head coach at your alma mater after Fresno Pacific and so forth, so I feel like a little connection.
Yeah, we graduated together.
right. You stayed a little longer
It took me
than
a
I
little
did.
longer to graduate.
Right. Coach Moore had over 32 years as a head coach. He had 637 wins. He was the National Coach of the Year this year for the NAI, which I believe is the first time that's ever happened in Westmont history. The team was top ranked this year. Didn't get to have a tournament because of COVID-19. So bizarre, kind of crazy circumstances to end on. And maybe we'll start there. How did you handle that with the team?
Well, I'm on this NABC board of directors,
right.
And I'm the only NAI coach on there. And the day it was announced, we had a board call at 8 o'clock in the morning. And Mike Bray, the Notre Dame coach, who's the president of the NABC board this year, just went off. He said, "Hey, I'm going to my shoot around," and Notre Dame's in the Big East, and he said, "Hey, hope the board call goes well, but I'm going to my shoot around," as though the tournament was still on. And we talked about it. We got to the end of the call, our call, and it seemed like full speed ahead. An hour and a half later, I get an email from the president of the NAI, Jim Carr, saying the tournament has been canceled. My longest walk ever up to Westmont. We live on Chelham Way. It's a walk up to the college. And when I got there, Jeff Azen had already rallied the troops. And so Coach Boucher, Coach Goodrow, Jeff, and the whole team was there. And times have changed, Dean. They all already knew. So you can imagine what social media can do for you. And I thought I was going to surprise them, but there was no surprise to be had, because you could tell that
they knew.
The puffy cheeks and the teary-eyed, and so we sat in the room and we cried and said it can't be so. And then we went out that afternoon and we had a practice.
Really?
We decided to have a practice anyway, and we had a really enjoyable time together. And that was my last practice at Westmont College, and it was their last practice for this past year at least. And so it was nostalgic and sad at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. And you were the coach of the year, and you were heading into the tournament as a 2-seed?
We were.
Oh. Yeah, that's a tough one.
And it was a team that we were finally completely healthy. Everybody was back. We had practiced for about a week with everybody in tow, and it felt like we were finally back to where we had been earlier in the year, with everybody healthy again. And so we liked our chances. We really liked our chances, and I don't say that very often, but we did like our chances.
Yeah. Well, God is still good.
Still good.
Yeah, still good. But that's got to be a huge disappointment.
Yep.
You got to Westmont. You were not a believer. You came for 2 years. Were you at Cypress?
Chapman? I was at Cypress College.
Okay.
Yep.
And you transferred in, recruited by Chet Kammerer, and you talked about you and Chet Kammerer one time took a drive to Angel Stadium to watch a game and hang out with a recruit. And on the drive, he said, "If I gave you a book called Mere Christianity, would you read it?" And you said that book's been with you since. Yeah. Talk about what happened with your faith journey at Westmont, after Westmont, and kind of that journey for you.
Yeah. Well, here's a little caveat. He said, "Hey, if I give you a book, will you read it?" And I said, "Sure."
Before he gave you the title?
And then he said it was mere Christianity. And I was not a believer at the time. But my respect for Chet, my respect for my teammates encouraged me to do that. So I came into Westmont a non-believer, and people prayed me into the kingdom. People like Chet Kammerer, Mark Miller, whose 3 sons I've had the privilege to coach. One of them works with your brother, Johnny Miller does. And so I read that book more out of respect for Chet than interest in the topic, and that changed my life. In fact, I have it. I wake up every morning and I read Proverbs, and I read, right now I'm in Matthew, and I have Mere Christianity right there. Those are my 3 staples with my bran flakes and my oatmeal flakes. Yeah.
Coffee? No coffee?
I'm not a coffee drinker.
Not a coffee
No. In fact, I've got 3 people in the house who are coffee drinkers, and I'd be competing for their coffee if I was a coffee drinker. But I have no interest in coffee at all. Never have. Love the smell, hate the taste. Yeah. But that was my faith journey. It began right about that time. Came to faith right after my senior year at Westmont, and then I wanted to come back more than anything to be able to recruit people who were like me. People without faith, or people struggling in their faith, or people who have deep faith. And I recruited all 3 of those quite heavily, and that was kind of my approach, that I wanted people who were interested in being ministered to. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted our players to be missionaries, and I wanted people who were seeking to find more depth in their life, and that's what I got to do in the context of basketball.
Yeah.
And one of the guys I got to coach was your brother Johnny.
Oh yeah,
and what a privilege! Yeah, good. I can't wait.
You were known. In fact, I know this firsthand because I played intramural, I think, a couple times against you, and you were tough. I mean, you were known as a tough, gritty competitor, as a player and as a coach. I used to sit across in the front row from you. Do you remember? By the way, do you remember our thing called the coaching staff?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so for the viewers who don't know, we would 10 of us dress up like Coach Moore, suit and tie, and we would have clipboards, and we'd be in the front row directly across from the coach. And I was kind of the ringleader, probably.
No doubt.
I probably matured. I hope I matured since then, maybe a little. But I'd work the refs up and down. So as coaches working the refs, we're over there working the refs back and forth. And so that was
double team.
Yeah, we're double teaming the refs. And the refs are kind of going, what are these guys? What are they doing? But you had this tough reputation. And I read something that you said in terms of, tough player, gritty, hard-nosed, and then you brought the Princeton offense, which was a revolutionary thing for Westmont and changed, I think, everything from my perspective as I saw that come into play, which is incredible to watch. But you said something. You said you don't have a philosophy of coaching until you get to 15 years as a head coach. You said, I discounted that idea originally, but then at that point, in the 15-year range, I realized that I had a philosophy of coaching that makes it more meaningful and more meaningful for my players. What is that philosophy?
Wow.
How would you describe that?
Well, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. When you say tough, gritty about a player, that usually means they're unskilled. And so that's what I was. I was tough and I was gritty because I was less skilled than the next guy. No, I know you didn't, but I know what the back end meaning of that is. At least for me it was. And I was just fortunate enough to play for great coaches. I want to go back to my Cyprus coach. He was John Wooden's first All-American. And so there was a connection to John Wooden through Don Johnson. And Don Johnson was one of my favorite men in the world, and I was one of his favorites as well. He just passed away about a year and a half ago, and I got to speak at his memorial, and that was an incredible privilege. And then you go from Don Johnson, John Wooden and Don Johnson, to Chet Kammerer. I couldn't have had 2 better college coaches than the two that I had. Wow. And Chet cared deeply for my soul, and Don cared for me as a person. And he was a Renaissance man, Don was. And Chet was just born and bred Indiana Hoosier with goodness deep in his heart. And he wanted me to experience his Savior. And he prayed me into a space where he was able to kind of encourage me to look at the kingdom in a little deeper way than I ever had. And so that was the difference maker. Back to your question about philosophy. I haven't forgotten. So my philosophy in that first 15 year or first 10 years at Westmont, I was 5 years elsewhere at Fresno Pacific. My philosophy was we want to play an aggressive brand of basketball. We want to play aggressive defensively. We want to play aggressive offensively, and then we talk a lot about that. But now my philosophy comes down to one sentence, and I think it says everything about what Westmont was about, at least when I was there, trying to be about. We want every single basket to come via the assist. And that you've never seen. You've never seen a box score. High school, college, NBA, where every single basket has come via the assist. About 4 or 5 years ago, we had 50 baskets in a game. We had 44 assists.
Really?
88% of the baskets came via the assist. When we lost the national championship game in 2015, we had one game where we were within 3 or 4 of assists to total baskets. And what that means is you're sharing the ball. You're really kind of sharing the ball in a way where everybody gets credit. And so our guys get giddy on the bench when they see a guy passing the ball to another guy for a basket. They jump up and down, not for the dunk, but for the extra pass or the pass that leads to a basket. And I think that's symbolic of how best to lead in a family situation, in raising kids. If you have the ball being passed, then you're sharing it, and you have a chance to not be egotistical. And you mentioned a word earlier, I think maybe it was before it was John Davies said this earlier about listening. You know, listening is about passing. Because listening is you have to kind of open up your ears to what the other person has to say. In passing, you have to be more interested in what the other person can do than what you do alone. And you get a little bit of credit with an assist, but you don't get the same kind of accolades that you do with a basket. And so I love the pass. I love what the pass means. And so our philosophy is we want every single basket to come via the assist. And if you have that mentality as a framework, then your culture changes pretty dramatically.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's interesting. And I happen to know you had 422 assists, ranked number 4 all time, and you did it in 2 seasons. So you passed the ball a fair amount.
Like I said, because I couldn't shoot the ball, I had to pass the ball. I had to
See,
find a way to be important.
See, as a basketball player, I was short, but I was slow. So I had the lateral mobility of an oak tree. So that didn't really work out for me, but I digress. Coach, if you were talking to, and you're on the national board with John Calipari and all these heavy hitters, but I guess one of my thoughts this morning was if you were talking to a young coach or somebody who was interested in coaching and felt like that was part of their gifting, what is the opportunity for a coach? What is the biggest opportunity for a coach?
So I speak at these events, and I'll be talking about whatever the topic may be, and there's always a young kid coach in the crowd, and he'll raise his hand at halfway through maybe and say, "Coach, how come they're not built the way we were in our time?" And this guy's 25, and I'm a little bit older. And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he goes, "Well, they just don't do the kinds of things that we did." And I said, "Well, here's a message for you. You're not going to like hearing what I'm about to tell you. If they're not like how you want them to be, that's not on them. That is on you." So you have to find a way to teach and to coach and to bring them along to the space that they need to get to. And we've never been at a perfect place. We'll never get to a perfect place. But we are further and closer to that perfect place than we ever have been because of parents, because of coaches, and because of teachers we've had. So I say back to that young coach, your work is yet to be done. So make sure that so I was on a call earlier today with a bunch of younger coaches and a Zoom call, and they were talking back and forth, and I didn't say a word until one of the coaches said, "Well, let's hear from Coach Moore." And they were talking about connectedness. And he said the best way to be connected to others is to be more about listening than about talking. And that is all about humility. My favorite chapter in that book you spoke about earlier, Mere Christianity, is this chapter number 8 on humility. And if you can only read one chapter in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, read that chapter, because it will take you to your knees, and it will take you to a place where you realize how important it is to understand others than thinking about what it is to be understood by somebody else. So
Yeah,
I just seek out ways in which I can listen more effectively and be a little bit more understanding of others. And I think that's what I would suggest to a young coach. Make it more about them than it is about you.
That's good. That's so good. I'm going to ask you about a bunch of different people, but I wanted to ask you about one kind of a rival coach, Dave Holmquist, who I thought it was really honoring what he said about you when you retired. He said, he quoted Bear Bryant, I think, but he said, Coach Moore is the kind of guy, he can take his players and beat yours, or he can take your players and beat his. I thought that's a pretty high honor. You had a lot of battles with Dave Holmquist over the years. What was that like? And Bill O'Dell, and I know there's been a lot of coaches that have kind of been around a long time. And what are those relationships like? I'm curious.
Well, let's go to Dave Holmquist to start with. And what you don't know is Dave recruited me.
Oh, he did?
So he was at Fresno Pacific. I was at, I wasn't anywhere. I was at Cypress College. And he was a Cypress College guy. So he played for Don Johnson as well. So we had a really strong connection. And the day I called Chet first to let him know I was coming to Westmont, because I knew if I had tried to call Dave first, he would try to convince me otherwise. So I called Chet, and then I called Dave, and I teared up. In fact, I probably more than just teared up. I cried when I told Dave that I wasn't coming to play for him. So he's been a friend for 40-some years.
Wow.
And we've had a great rivalry, but more importantly, we have an incredible amount of respect for one another. And I bet if you were to kind of check our records against one another, I bet it's almost 500. Yeah, right. I bet if you were to kind of look back at that, I bet we're right there, 500 against one another. And Dave's 8 wins away from 1,000. He's 8 wins away from 1,000 victories. And he's one of the finest coaches, but he's also one of the greatest men I've ever been around.
That's
and so
great.
Dear friend, was recruited by him, but also a guy who just, I think he's got 2 PhDs, maybe a third. He's got 3 or 4 master's degrees. Just an incredible Renaissance man in a really important way. And we talk, 2 or 3 times a week.
Do you really?
Still, yeah.
He says you're the greatest coach he ever coached against, which is a high compliment from him. I saw him at Vaughn's like 6 months ago.
Okay.
And I've never met him, but I'm just looking at him. He probably wondered if I was stalking him or what. I'm like, I think that's Dave Holmquist. So you must feel like you won the lottery in terms of Don Johnson, Dave Holmquist, Chet Kammerer. Of course, you married into the Lavin family.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had quite a circle.
Yeah.
That's probably had a big impact on you, just all these Cap Lavin and all these people that have been in your life, basketball people, but deep character people, amazing people.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Well, you mentioned my father-in-law, Cap. And Cap he's the epitome of, that Dos Equis commercial, the most interesting man in the world?
Right.
They got it wrong. It wasn't him, it was Cap Lavin. And Cap Lavin was, the first guy invited by the Harlem, maybe the only guy in that era, invited by the Harlem Globetrotters to be a part of their team. Not the Washington Generals, but the Harlem Globetrotters.
Really?
And, here's this guy being invited in the 50s, and that tells you the kind of ability he had to play the game of basketball. And he was a Hall of Famer in San Francisco, a Hall of Famer at USF. Could have played professionally, but back in the early 50s, playing professionally wasn't what it is today in the NBA. And Cap's just one of the all-time greats. But the greatest coach I've ever been coached by is my wife. Not even close. Not even close. As good as Don was, as good as Chet was, as good as Dave Holmquist is, as good as Cap Lavin is, my wife is the greatest coach I've ever been around.
That is wonderful.
And she was the eldest of 6 kids, and Steve Lavin's the youngest of 6, so she had to coach Steve, and she had to coach her siblings, and she then got stuck with coaching somebody even harder than her siblings, and that's me. And she coaches me up every single day, even today. She gave me a haircut before I came, and I hadn't had a haircut in 10 weeks, and so I was more presentable for the Dean Wilson Show. I know it's not the Dean Wilson Show, but I call it the
great.
Dean Wilson Show.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
so, yes, I did hit the lottery. And
Yeah.
I hit the lottery when I walked down the aisle, and I got a chance to see my wife walk towards me. And 30 years of marriage as of September 15th, and greatest coach I've ever known.
Oh, that's wonderful. What is your vision, or what is your thought process? I know this transition's happening with you and stepping out of the head coaching, which is going to be weird for me, among others, but we're trying to get over it. What is your vision as you think about the next 10 years and Westmont, your family? I know you have 2 wonderful daughters. What does it look like? Not that you have it all planned out, but what is your vision for this season, next season?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. I am so glad you asked. God has something planned for me. So the head of the NABC board is a guy named Jim Haney. And Jim Haney was the head coach at Oregon, and he's been the president, the executive director of the NABC for the last 20 years or so. Great man, a little over 20 years, I think it is. And so when I was preparing to make the announcement, I gave Jim a call on the phone. And he said, John, I woke up this morning early knowing I was going to have this 10 o'clock call with you. And God just kept speaking to me. And here's what he said. And Jim said about 10 things in a row. And after each one, saith the Lord, saith the Lord, saith the Lord. 10 straight times. And then he goes, and here's the last important message, really important message for you, John. Do not run into anything. Wait. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 weeks. And I'm going to be waiting for a good while longer, because I think there is something in store, something yet to be done, something God that has for me that he's going to put out to me on a platter.
Yep.
And we'll find out what that is.
Yeah.
But it is something that I would not have been allowed to do if I'd still been coaching for the next few years. And so I know that there is something in store, and I can't wait to see what it is.
I can't wait to see it either. Yeah. You're an incredible writer. So I don't know if that's on the list, but I think you should write. Yeah. Every time I get one, I responded back to you. You never respond back to me when I respond back to you, by the way. Kind of offended by that. But,
I'm sorry.
But the letter you sent out to the coaches circle after your announcement was so powerful. So I don't know if the Lord has writing in store, but I'd read it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I think there may be some possibilities there. And I, on that last coaches circle, I don't think I've responded to anyone, Dean. So you're in good company. You're in good company. It's been last 10 weeks have been a time in which I've been celebrated by a lot of people, and what you wrote to me was just so sweet to get that from you. But it's a little bit like too much cake.
Right.
Too much ice cream, too much celebration. You start to wonder whether that's really you they're talking about. And so I think you have to be careful, and I haven't responded to quite a number of people just because I'm taking it in, and I'm going to find a time in which to do that in the most present of ways and the most sincere of ways as well. And I do love writing. My mom was a great writer. Cappy Lavin was a great writer. My daughter, Jessie, is an unbelievable writer. She'll write a book before I will because she's gifted in that way. And I have a daughter by the name of Jacqueline who's a great speaker. And so I've got a great writer in one, and I've got a great speaker in another. Back to the man who is Dos Equis commercial, but it's really Cap Lavin. There are interesting people in the world, Dean, and those are the great storytellers. There are interested people in the world that are the great listeners. Very few people are both. But Cap Lavin is one.
Wow.
He's a great storyteller. He was a great listener. My daughter Jacqueline is a great storyteller. She's a great listener. Steve Lavin was a great storyteller, is a great storyteller, and is a great listener. And that's why he's the best. If he gets back into Division I coaching, almost every year he's the top recruiter. The number one recruiting class in the year is Steve Lavin's. He is very, very gifted.
Wow. What a family. So that's wonderful. I want to close with, we only have a few minutes, but I'm going to just give you a name. This will be a little lightning round. I'll give you a name, and give me a few sentences or whatever
Yeah.
about the person. Some of these are former players. Some of them are other categories. Brian Gomes.
Maybe best ever.
Yeah.
And today, a dear friend. We just texted back and forth. A couple days ago, I sent him a picture of my daughter making me lunch. And his son is Drew, and his daughter is, I'll think of her name, Camille. And she goes by Mimi, I think, or Mealy, I think is what he calls her. And he said, I got to teach them how to make me lunch.
So you sent him a picture?
I sent him a picture of Jacqueline making me lunch, and he goes, I got to get my 5 and 7-year-old or 4 and 6-year-old or whatever they
trained.
are. So it's a little early.
Daniel Carlin.
Well, I just got a text this morning from Daniel, and the sad story about Daniel is that I think we would have won a national championship if Daniel had been healthy for that last game. And Daniel and I sat in the hospital together after we lost that game, and it was such a tenuous circumstance. And that's our memory. That's one of our fondest memories, is sitting in the hospital together, helping him get to the other side.
Wow.
And he's another very dear friend of mine today.
Chris Clark.
Gosh, you're picking out some great ones. Chris, I would say what I loved most about Chris is how much he grew up during the time.
Mm-hmm.
He came in with a group of guys who had been freshmen together. Adrian Phillips, Mitch Pierce, Ryan Tillery, Will Gully. Those are all guys who came in together. And Chris came in as a sophomore. But he acclimated to those guys. That's one of the tightest group of players I've ever had, and it's because those other 4 guys really welcomed Chris well. And then Chris just kind of fit in well. One of the greatest scorers I've ever had. He was a big time.
What about Adrian Phillips?
AP was
all-time steals leader.
Yeah, all-time steals leader. But AP was an unbelievable leader right away. He was a great leader as a freshman, and then just got better each year along the way. And so it culminated with a phenomenal career. 3 out of 4 years they made it to the national tournament. Probably the best game Westmont's ever played at the national tournament was AP's junior year, and we beat a team that was quite good, and Adrian had a phenomenal game, and so did Mitch and Till and Will Gully as well. But
wow.
Yeah.
Joe Kearns.
Yeah, Joe. Well, we share something, which is we're lefties.
Right.
And I had really long hair,
right.
And he had really long hair. And Joe's one of my all-time favorites just because he cared so much, and he was a great defender. He talked about getting into people's grills, and then since then, I think what Joe cares so much about is the families of the people who work for him.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to get him more involved in some things we were doing in Westmont basketball. And he said, I'll only do it if I can continue to support all the families that it can't get in the way of my job, because my priority is to make sure that there's food on the table and that the people who work for me can be as successful as possible. That's
so great.
Everything in the world about Joe to me.
So wonderful. Dr. David Winter.
Oh gosh. He's my president. He's my president. He's a president that I came to Westmont with. He's a president that I got a chance to come back to Westmont with. He called me on the phone. I was in the kitchen. Rachel picked the phone up back in the day when there were things called a landline. And Rachel handed me the phone. It's Dr. Winter. And he said to me, I want to offer you the job back at Westmont. And I'll remember where I was in Hieronymus Lounge when I came back, and they did a huge press conference. And I remember exactly where David was and what he said to me to make me feel as though I was coming back to the greatest job ever. And I was. And that springtime, as I came back, I was driving between Fresno and Westmont. I was staying on campus, and I would walk through the formal gardens, and I would pray this prayer: never allow me to take this for granted.
Yeah.
And I continue to pray that even on this day, in these days. But I always will go by the statue of David and Helene, and I'll put my hand on one of their shoulders and put my other hand on the other shoulder, just because I'm so devoted to and committed to their standards of what they brought to Westmont. Helene and Dave is who I'm talking about, and Helene to this day is one of my favorite people in this town, and so it's not just David, it's David and Helene, and Helene and David. Yeah.
That's wonderful. My little brother Johnny.
Yeah.
He's not little anymore.
No.
My big brother, younger brother.
Yeah.
What was he like?
Well, what Johnny did, I knew Johnny when he was, well, you would bring Johnny to early morning hoops.
Right.
And for those who don't know, Dean and I used to play 6 a.m. basketball together. And then Dean brought Johnny. And Johnny was 12, 13, somewhere in there, 12, 13, 14. And he was about as confident a 12-year-old amongst men, playing amongst men. And that's who Johnny is. I think Johnny's a very confident young man. Yeah. And he was confident as a player, but he was more confident as a leader. And I think Johnny became captain his senior year because of the leader that he is. And we were really good his senior year, and we went to the national tournament his senior year. Hadn't been for a few years before that. And so Johnny and Sant and that group of guys, they took us to the national tournament, but it was Johnny's leadership that really made us the kind of team that we were.
I love it. Jeff Hazen.
The best. Yeah. He's the best. He and I have been together for 27 years. Jeff could have been a head coach 10 times over. In fact, if he had stepped into my role, he would have done it better than I did. And I'm not being falsely humble. I really, really believe that to be true, which tells you the kind of sacrifice he was willing to make for all those years. And he's just the best, and he's the best in so many different ways. I mean, he was an assistant under Chet Kammerer, was an assistant under Jeff Crosby, was an assistant under me for 27 years. He's going to continue on with Landon Boucher. You know, I can talk all I want about humility. Jeff Hazen lives it out. Wow. He lives it out in how willing he is to serve, and how loyal he is to Westmont basketball, and how wanting he is for players to have the best experience possible. Yeah. And if I had a little more time, I'd tell a story that Johnny told about Jeff. In fact, I'm going to take a little more time.
Go ahead.
Johnny said when he came in as a freshman, all the seniors were just bragging about Ace. And he said, sophomore year, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, he said, what's the big deal about A's? What's the big deal about A's? Then he got to his senior year, and he realized A's was waiting. He wasn't allowing people to have a piece of himself until they had paid their dues. And by the time Johnny got to his senior year, he had paid his dues. And he realized how valuable it was to have a piece of A's. Wow. Because A's had saved himself for when Johnny finally earned the right to have a piece of Jeff Hazen.
Oh,
and so A's is loyal to the hilt, and I think Johnny knows what that means, and I think we all know what that means, but the best. He's the best.
Well, we got to close. We're out of time, but I want to encourage people who are watching, since it's not a surprise, but we're going to honor Coach Moore at our December event, Legacy of Service event, the Rosewood Miramar on December 15th. We've got a couple other names coming that we're going to announce, but we thought of you, Coach, and you've had an impact on the community, in these players' lives that goes on and on. Just a guy like me was just a random student, but I just always liked you, loved you, looked up to you. I feel like you're pastoral in a sense in the community. I feel like you're just wonderful. So I just want to honor you. Thank you for your years, and I look forward to seeing what's next and what God shows you. So thanks for coming on.
Well, this has been an honor to be with you and to receive that award. I love this city. I love the Turner Foundation. I love what you did on the west side, and I'd go over there and visit you on the west side. Yeah. And I love Westmont. I love our college, and it is our college because we share it in the same. It's our alma mater, and so I think the best is yet to come, Dean.
Yeah.
The best is yet to come for Westmont. The best is yet to come for Westmont basketball. I can't wait to see what Landon does in the way of the cupboard is full, And I can't wait to see what next year brings for him and for Rob and for A's. But I think the best is yet to come for me as well. And I can't wait to see what God has in store for me. And,
I believe that.
But what a privilege it is to be here, and thanks for allowing me to spend some time with you in this wonderful backyard.
Yeah, great.
You know?
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.